Pat Crakes is the Rosetta Stone of sports business. He knows a lot about a whole lot in this business, and we're going to talk about it here on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio. Pat, of course, a longtime executive with Fox Sports. He is now consulting with this company at Crakes Media. And if anybody knows what's going to happen in the sports media landscape before it does happen, it's Pat Crakes. We're going to talk about him. We're also going to spotlight his career and look at how he's made this journey into where he is today and some of the stories that have emanated from it. Pat, first of all, thank you for doing this. I appreciate this. Now, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I've obviously been following you on Twitter and seeing the tweets. And one word that you always seem to bring up is incremental. That seems to be a word that you go to constantly in your own individual lexicon. In what way is your career nothing but incremental? Or how do you see that in the way your career has manifested?
Well, I think that's very interesting you picked on that. Incremental, the idea of incremental value creation or growth is very important because the alternative to that is zero sum. And if you're going to do that, whatever you're replacing something with has to be more than what you have. That certainly occurs in business and in life, but a lot of the way things really work and come together is more on a gradual pace or an evolutionary pace, right? And so I think that incremental is a great word for how the media business is expanding and evolving at the moment. And I also think that, somewhat my career, and maybe all careers are in that way, they build upon themselves, right? In an expansive way. Certainly I've added lanes to my career and knowledge base as I've gone along. Instead of staying a specialist, I started out a generalist, and then I became kind of a specialist, and then I became a generalist again. And I think that's provided me a unique perspective. It's able me to take the things I learned and build upon them instead of saying, well, I'm done with that, and now I move over to something else. It's all kind of meld together. And I've been fortunate to go and work in places where that is encouraged and was valued, and there were opportunities to do it. Many established companies, you do the job's described, the lane is the lane. At Fox Sports, because it was growing and new and hey, we're trying to figure this out. Anybody who has a bright idea or anybody who can actually just keep this together, anybody who wants to take a risk, anybody who wants to add something, that opportunity's here. You may have to work more or harder. You may have to make some sacrifices, but this can be something you can learn in. We're prepared to build it internally. And that worked for me as a career, and it's worked for me since I've left Fox Sports. And I feel very fortunate for that. So yeah, incremental is the word I use a lot, because when I think about value creation exercises in the business, it's like we're making so much and now we're looking to make more, right? We're not looking to spend money and lose money. Well, it doesn't mean we won't experiment, but it's not like we're really investing here so that we can just see what happens or we want to go backwards. For us to really get excited about something, it's got to build upon what we already have, or work complementary towards eventually replacing at a higher level than what we currently have. And a great example would be where the media business is today, where you have the old established system dominated by broadcast and pay TV in secular decline, but still producing the overwhelming majority of profits for the business. Meanwhile, the new streaming businesses are growing on the digital side, and they're enormously unprofitable, for better or for worse. So much so that some original digital-only non-traditional platforms that were supposed to be deeply involved directly in distributing media have passed on that opportunity. And it's been left to established media to build their own digital assets, complementary to their current established ones, to try to build that incremental value I talk about all the time.
So I hear you talk about all these things, and you seem to have a special power, and that is predicting the future, especially in the way the business is going. You see something happening before it happens. What's going on in your brain where you're able to foresee what is taking place in this business?
That's right. Well, I think that some of my friends and former colleagues will say, Pat sees a lot. He also doesn't see everything. And we'd like to show you a couple of those. But I appreciate that, Bryan. I think it starts out at a very early age. And I'll be honest, playing sports, growing up across the country, California, Alaska, West Virginia, and in the Army, building upon, thinking ahead, strategy, what's coming next. Here's these different options. Here's these different lanes. Which one do I choose? Which one do I think, intuitively, right, is going to happen? And then academically getting interested in things like economics and economic research, continuing my development as a military officer, where you're trying to take different situations and figure out which route to choose on the fly, applying it to different situations with more time to think, with more on the line, right? Or not more on the line, more time to process what the decision will be, into business. And like I said, Fox Sports was always a growing, exciting place with a lot going on. So there were opportunities to constantly be taking in information and being in the research department and starting out as a researcher in the business. And into my core, I'm a researcher still, trying to figure out where the puck's going, to use Wayne Gretzky's analogy, right? What's the highest probability? While at the same time understanding we've got to hedge the past, we've got to hedge against, possibly being wrong, right? Warren Buffett has a great saying, predicting floods doesn't count, building arcs does. I try to take that as seriously as possible when it comes to strategy.
Pat Crakes is with us, longtime TV executive. I'm Bryan Fenley. You touched on your time in the military. What is the greatest display of bravery that you've had to showcase?
That I've been through?
Yeah.
I think it was actually getting out the door for that fifth jump at airborne school.
Wow.
I went to airborne school because it's a recognized symbol of excellence. And my father, who was also a full colonel in the Air Force, we just laid him to rest a couple weeks ago at the Black Hills Memorial Cemetery. I was very close with my father. He said, "Look, son, if you do this airborne thing, it's going to be one of the only things. People aren't going to care anything else you do in your life. They're going to remember. They're going to remember that." And I'll be damned if he wasn't right. There's two things people, when they meet me or they know anything about me, care about: that I was a paratrooper and that I started in the studio mailroom. They don't care about anything else. Nothing else is interesting. So I got to airborne school. You got to volunteer for it. I went to basic training. I didn't enlist. I'm 17 years old, or I just turned 18. I volunteered to go to airborne school 4 weeks. And we get to jump week, which is the week you actually jump. You've been up in towers and stuff. And I got injured in the middle of airborne school. I had to spend a couple extra weeks there, made a decision to continue to stick it out, which was a very important decision because I thought about not doing it. It changed my life by going through it. It really did. But I got up into the aircraft, and after, you have to make 5 qualifying jumps if the weather is permitting. If not, they'll take less. But if the weather's good, 5 jumps in jump week, and then you get your wings. And I got to jump 4, and I started realizing that I was scared of heights. I was literally scared of heights. Here I am, almost graduated from airborne school, been uneasy the whole time. And I'm like, I'm afraid. And I had to make a decision of what I was going to do. I got myself out the door. Unfortunately, military parachuting, you've got somebody typically in front of you and behind you pushing you.
Sure.
And you got master saying, "Get off my airplane, get off my airplane," as he takes the static lines. But the truth of the matter is that going up for the 5th jump was very, very hard. I did get out the door. I got my wings. I got to Fort Bragg. And for the first 6 or 7 months there, the jumping was hard. And then I eventually came to the conclusion that I came to the realization that I was going to have to face my fear in a way that allowed me to continue, or I was going to have to raise my hand and say, I can't do this. So I just boiled it down to my sense of mortality, came to the conclusion that there was something beyond, and had faith in that. And then I began to say, I'm going to jump every opportunity I can. So you regularly jump, right? The rules are you have to jump at least once every 3 months to be active and get paid your jump pay. But you can jump a lot more than that, right? And your unit probably will jump more than that, about once a month. I started raising my hands to volunteer for everything. And by the time I left the 82nd, 2 years later, that fear window had whittled down from, let's say, 90 seconds, maybe even longer, right, to literally 0.3 seconds. Because once I got out the door, the fear went away.
Wow.
So you ask an honest question, I'm being honest with you. That to me,
Yeah.
because that transformed my life. That gave me the bravery to get through things that to start over when I made mistakes, when I had setbacks, and we all make mistakes. We make them throughout our lives, and to pick myself back up and find a way to just keep going. And I'm very thankful for it because I've had a pretty unusual life because of that, and I feel very grateful. I mean, not everybody gets to be on a Fox Sports Radio podcast with nationally known radio sports talk show hosts such as yourself, Bryan. I mean,
So well, I'm an anchor. I'm an anchor. I'm part of the format, but I'm not like the main person. You're the executive here, and so I had to go through like 25 people just to get you on this podcast. By the way,
was one of them Don? I hope one of them was Don.
yeah.
But, yeah. So
No.
Don Morton, best executive voice in all of sports television. Don Morton, Fox Sports Radio.
Yeah, he certainly is a legend. So are you. You brought up your dad. What was it like seeking out his validation growing up?
Well, my father was very important to me. He wasn't always around when I was younger, even though my mother and he were married. He was a reserve Air Force officer and a very senior banking executive in California and Alaska and West Virginia. But I was very fortunate that he cared about me a great deal. And as I got older, it was easier for him to have me around while he was traveling and doing other things. And I like to say I didn't learn a lot from him that I applied early in life. But as I got older and I made a lot of mistakes, my father stuck with me, and the things that I learned from him by his example and also by his extreme patience with his knuckleheaded son managed to pull off some things like getting out of airborne school. I'll give you a great example of something I did. I got out of the Army in 1986, went to Indiana University. Dad was like, hey, go to ROTC. In 2 years, you have your commission. Great. Like, Dad, I was a hotshot sergeant in the 82nd Airborne Division. These ROTC cadets, they're just low speed. So I joined the fraternity and had a good time and met my future wife, did a lot of great things. And then I get out of college, and next thing you know, it's like, okay, now I got to go to work and I can't find a job. Oh, and by the way, I don't have my commission. Now I got to go back and do it the hard way through officer candidate school, which I did. But I will tell you, I almost didn't make it. I almost didn't get that commission. The only thing I have on my wall today still is that commission. My father stayed on me, but in a good way. And when it came time for me to need some help to get back to the Army, to get the opportunity to go to officer candidate school, he did make a phone call, and that helped me. And I'm thankful for it because it was one of those inflection point moments in my life that today is very precious to me. And I feel very lucky to have had a relationship with my father and had some time to reflect on it recently, right, with his past. And he really did have a lot of really great impact upon me. He was very sick late in life. I was very happy that my brother and I were able to take care of him. He lived what I called in the world's best boarding care in Manhattan Beach, California, which is not a bad place to be in a boarding care. But my brother and I were able to handle that. I feel very lucky that I had a dad like that. And I learned an awful lot from him that I didn't get to apply when I was young, but I apply now that I'm older. And I'm very grateful for that.
What is a story that he's told you, and maybe this came up when you were in the moments of reflection about his time serving, that was a moment for him that was heroic or something that stood out in conversations he's had with you?
Well, I think the subject the adventure, right? My father had a fascinating military story. He himself, the son of a full colonel, gets an appointment to West Point. He flunks Portuguese and flunks out of West Point. His father kicks him out of the house. He goes and lives with my maternal grandmother. He enters into what is called the Aviation Cadets Program, which will eventually become the Air Force Academy. Gains his regular commission before his classmates at West Point, and then goes on to a regular Air Force career that includes lead aircraft commander of the second military expedition to Antarctica, dropping Belgian paratroopers during the Belgian Congo revolt, being part of bringing in British Special Air Services into Jordan to protect the young King Hussein from the Palestine Liberation Organization, which has just been ejected from Jordan, service in Korea, Vietnam, this giant sense of responsibility and adventure had an impact upon me. And I'm very thankful for it because my life has been unusual in some ways. How I ended up where I was, I could have never predicted. Um, and I'm not Forrest Gump or anything like that, but certainly I wouldn't have mapped it out like this. But that sense of adventure that he instilled upon me by doing those things and saying, look, you have to be in places like this to get these chances, that really had a real impact upon me. And it impacted my military, opportunities, the things that I thought I would be possible to do, right? The things that I think are possible are driven largely by his sense of adventure and an expansive belief in you keep going, try some things that might be a risk, try some things that might be interesting. You never know what's going to happen to you. And so, yeah, from him, I get a giant sense of adventure about life. And I feel very thankful for that.
We're joined by Pat Crakes, longtime Fox executive, a man who sees what's happening in sports media before it happens. He's a big and strong mind in the biz. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. So looking now towards your time in media, and like you've talked about in other podcasts, you started out in the mailroom. What was initially one of the biggest risks you took on upon yourself when you were first trying to make your way and establish yourself in sports media?
Well, I think the first thing that I realized when I got into the mailroom was, look, because I went into the Army before I went to college, I'm older than my peer group who graduated from college and was already starting becoming, got themselves to work on the business side. I did want to work on the business side of media. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to manage things or be a part of something big. And but I didn't really know what that meant. And most of the other folks in the mailroom were all people looking to get into production. I was really the only one looking to get into the business side. So there was a lot of sense of well, actually I've delayed this too long. There's a lot of opportunity here. People can still start at the bottom and work their way up. And that is very much true here. So, I'm a little kind of worried if this doesn't work out, what happens next, right? This doesn't pay very well. I used to joke, make $250 a month. The union takes 125.
Yes.
I had the National Guard at the time, which helped supplement the income. But the year in the mail, they don't pay much in the mailroom because they're like, you're lucky to be here. You're lucky to be in this mailroom. And a funny story, on my first day in the mailroom, you get your blue shirt. And after being told that I had to park outside the lot,
Mm-hmm.
I go through the briefing and say, look, we're great to have you here, but I just want you to understand something. You are lower ranking than everyone at this studio except security cops that have to wear helmets. I'm like, that's a strange thing to say to someone. And then they get on the lot and I realize, oh my God, there are security cops that have helmets. I outrank those people, but nobody else. Now there's security cops that don't have helmets. Now, I don't know whether that was a joke or not, but I used to always laugh that if we got attacked or something, there was a chain of command. If it was just us and the security guards with helmets left, I was in charge.
Yes.
So anyway, they used to ride mopeds. It was hilarious. So anyway, but you're starting at the bottom. And, but also there's a lot of opportunity with that. And that year I spent in the mailroom, how I got out came with all the relationships. I got to know all the executive assistants, Chase Carey's assistant, Rupert Murdoch's 3 assistants, people, the human resources folks. And when a job finally opened up in the research department for a junior analyst, I took it into the head of HR at FBC and said, I think I'm qualified to do this with my economics degree. And she said, oh, you're not qualified to do that. You're qualified for the analyst position. And I said, oh, really? Oh. So I go on the interview, right? And the day you have an interview, you bring your suit into the trailer and you hang it up and then you change out of your shorts and your blue shirt and you go. Went to the interview. It was really great. And it was at that interview I met a gentleman named Bill Wanger, who would be instrumental in my career. I would work for him for 20 years. Very, very fortunate to work for him. He was very good to me all those years. And he was the person who actually at Fox Sports, when I went to work for him, or at Fox at the time, who made it possible for me to go to officer candidate school and keep my job at Fox Sports. Wow. In some ways, I owe that to Billy. He was a great boss to me and developed me across all those years, and quite frankly, put up with me sometimes, I'll be honest with you. Billy was there, so I met everybody except the 2 guys who ran the department. So I go back to, well, they're in New York. So when Andy and Giles come back, we'll have you meet with them. So I go back down to the trailer, get out of my suit, get ready to go on my mail run. HR calls, like, look, they loved you. You'll meet with Andy and Giles next week, and we're really happy about this. So I'm sorting the mail, and 5 minutes later, they call back. It's HR, and I'm like, oh no. So listen, Pat, you don't have to meet with Andy and Giles. Rupert's assistant shagged Andy down in New York and said that they should hire you. So you got the job. You start in 2 weeks. They don't need to meet you. And it was because of the relationship I developed of reliability and politeness with Mr. Murdoch's assistants that the oldest one, the one that'd been with him the longest, called Andy and said, we know this kid, you should hire him. And that felt really good. So I got the job without having to meet the guys who ran the department, too much to their chagrin. No, I'm kidding.
No.
But yeah, that's how it went. So that was my experience in the mailroom. It was a tough year, but it was a great year. And like I said, I got a lot of experience. I met everybody. Years later, decades later, Chase Carey's assistant would end up being my temp one time when my assistant was on vacation. She just came into my office and smiled and said, we talk about you all the time. It's like, it's just great, that you got out of that mailroom and you did something with it. She's like, her name was Carol. It was funny, right? She remembered me taking the mail to her 20 years before.
Wow. Yeah. Speaking of all these people you met during your early days at Fox, what was the landscape like during that time in the 90s at Fox when they seemed to be wide-eyed and looking for opportunities and the hope of competing with ESPN and with a substantial amount of financial backing? There were so many different avenues to go after.
Yeah. So, look, one of my first jobs when I got in the research, a lot of things, my first week in the research department, first couple of weeks in the research department, Power Rangers launched, the Chevy Chase show launched, and Fox was the X-Files launched. A whole bunch of building blocks were put in place, and Fox had just retreated from a 7-night-a-week primetime schedule because it had failed. So they rolled back 3 nights. They went back to 4 nights or something like that. But they were going to come back, but it was a big disaster. And then Chevy Chase was a big disaster, that was a fascinating thing to be there for. But Power Rangers and the Kids Network were literally killing it. And Power Rangers were, doing a 70 share among children 2 to 11. And everybody was upset about kids kicking each other, but Power Rangers were off and running and paying all the bills. The idea to pitch the NFL was going on, and I helped load the slides into the carousels for David Hill and Chase Carey's presentation to the NFL to take the NFC package away from CBS. 6 carousels, check each one of them because it's slides in a carousel sent to New York, right? To make sure each one of these presentations, there was no PowerPoint really, put on a slide to go through the presentation. A couple months later, we got the NFC package, and I was the kids analyst working for a great person named Maureen Smith, who would later go on to run some channels at Discovery and some other things. And 2 nights of programming, doing the analysis, the ratings analysis for it. I became the sports analyst working for Billy Wanger, who became the sports director, in addition to doing other things. He was a director. He's running the affiliate sales research and a bunch of other things because he's a very capable guy, super capable guy. And that began a long march up the ladder, right, to eventually becoming this powerhouse of Fox Sports. But we got the NFC package and we put that together, and it was enormously successful. There was lots of low-hanging fruit because the presentation of the property hadn't been invested in a long time. And along comes David Hill, right, an outsider, but an enormously experienced sports executive who helped Mr. Murdoch build Sky TV in the UK, but also before that helped innovate sports coverage in Australia by using things like a little duck called Daddles, who used to come across the screen after a goal, and children would watch the events and wait for Daddles to come across. It was an innovation to get more engagement with the family. David pulled it off. He'd worked for Rupert for years, created tons of value for him. He's a legend. Don't need to go on about it, but David's an outsider. And then his partner, Ed Gorn, one of the lead producers at CBS. If you look at if you watch One Shining Moment, so Ed is responsible for helping breathe life into One Shining Moment. Ed Gorn's name is the executive producer of all those NCAA telecasts at the end there, and Ed was was in charge of baseball and football and other things at CBS. He comes to Fox because CBS no longer has football. And he's the experienced hand who understands US television and understands the execution. And together they just create this enormous partnership of innovation that is within this familiar set, this kind of incremental growth, right? It's still football, but we're going to put a score box up. And we're going to also treat this a little bit, have a little fun with this, right? Which is where, their other partner, Scott Ackerson, and the creation of Fox NFL Sunday and the real evolution of a brand, right, comes together. Scott, David, and Ed create Fox NFL Sunday. And along with the presentation of the games, they move the sport and they move all sports television, they catch it up 10 years in 1 week, right? Boom. And, we go out and we start acquiring other sports. We get baseball, right? And we get hockey. And then we begin to build these regional sports networks, that were an idea that John Malone began to create in the late 70s, but people begin to get idea there might be a real business here if you rolled some of them up together. And other talent executives joined the company on that end, like Bob Thompson, who's a legend in the pay TV business, and others, and Randy Freer and others. And we begin to build this system, right, under the Fox Sports brand that takes advantage of the underexposure of sports media in an era of increased options through the pay TV bundle that, of course, is going to continue to build as we bring digital into it. But the underexposure, underdeliver, and underinvestment in all sports became apparent almost immediately. And ESPN, which was also an example of that, picked up the ball and ran with it as well, right? And we begin kind of the modern era of presentation of live sports to a place unheard of, where sports are really the most important properties in all of audiovisual distribution, because they're the only things that still have to absolutely be consumed live that aren't replicable. You can't replicate the NFL. It is what it is. It has intrinsic value on its own. Same with Major League Baseball, right? Same with many of these properties. They are what they are, and they have an intrinsic value to them, and they have to be consumed live, which means the entire fractionalization of attention for that moment in time you want to pay attention to that, when you want to watch it, you've got to stop paying attention to everything. You've kind of got to dial in at least partly to this, which, anymore is hard to do. So there was a huge investment. I was, at the lower end of the chain at that time. So I was doing a lot of blocking and tackling and assisting, but I got to learn a ton. I remember we tried to take a run at ESPN by taking the RSNs and cobbling them together into like a national network. I remember trying to figure out how to rate those with Billy. I used to fax these sheets showing all the programming things to Neil. I mean, not kidding. And we're trying to build this national network. It didn't work, right? But I think the great lesson is that even though it didn't work, right, we weren't able to pull it off. The RSNs went on to create tremendous value at Fox. And then later, about 2008, 2009, the idea comes back like, do we want to take another run at a national pay TV network? And that's where the genesis of FS1 begins to come. Oh. And I got an opportunity that time to not be a blocker and tackler, to be one of the people that helps put that together, which was a lot of fun.
What were those conversations like at the formative stages of trying to strategize FS1, and you being a part of this, and you injecting your advice and your thoughts into making this possible?
Well, I think, look, what was happening in the late 2000s was an understanding that the bundle had gotten awful big. The established pay TV bundle, people forget, got to 100 million homes and was penetrating like 93, 94% of all US TV homes. Now, nowhere else in the rest of the world has pay television ever done that, right? In Mexico, it's 50%. In Europe, it's 50%. What happened in the United States with the incorporation of broadcast television stations into the pay TV bundle, even though you can get them over the air, into one big kind of kit where you got everything, caused, I understand everybody complains about it, but we had 100 million people paying $70 a month at least for this thing at its peak. But it kind of peaked, and we had lots of smaller pay TV channels we were launching that certainly were good, but they were kind of, each one was getting segmented more and more, right? The audience that you were trying to attract there was getting smaller and smaller, no matter how quality it was or how much they were engaged. And what was starting to happen was the slices of the bread were getting too thin, right? At the same time, so pay TV distributors are hearing complaints, and we're feeling, it's getting harder to launch these channels. At the same time, the big sports are still on broadcast television, and the NFL, Major League Baseball, NASCAR, they're over on Big Fox, and every year the revenue stream is advertising based, right? So if you're paying $1 billion, making it up to the NFL, your $1 billion every year is secured by advertising. Well, that's good and bad, right? NFL's big and scale, broadcast television reaches every TV home, but it's subject to two things that are uncertain on a yearly basis. Number one, ratings delivery, which can fluctuate. And number two, the cyclicalness of the US economy. And in 2000, we got jammed pretty hard and had to take $1 billion write down on baseball. In 2008, we saw some of that happen again, but even worse, ESPN, married with ABC, was taking the pay TV model, which adds subscription fees to your revenue stream, right? That are long-term contractual with escalators. So you've got a guaranteed stream of income along with your advertising stream. ESPN was beginning to bid for sports rights all over the place. And the research we were doing at the time showed that ESPN's brand for the first time was getting in front of Fox Sports. They used to live side by side in this place where Fox Sports was the biggest and best. Ed Gorn used to call us Gucci, right? Because we had, look at the NFL, Major League Baseball, it's like a Daytona 500. And then ESPN is there every day with the information. They're doing the blocking and tackling. And they just say, they're doing every minute of every day, they're doing television, right? We get to set up NFL every week. It's hard to do the NFL, but they're doing NFL too, right? It's like their brand of information and reliability was now becoming higher quality because they were going after bigger and better sports all the time. And people were perceiving them as the leader. They were calling themselves the worldwide leader, and people were beginning to perceive them as the leader. And they were able to pay for this because of the pay TV revenue stream, which they knew they were going to get regardless of what happened with the economy or ratings delivery. And the pay TV bundle, all the rates were still going up. So it became apparent that something had to give to help us, or we were going to end up not being able to bid for one of our core properties, heaven forbid, the NFL. So we had a set of pay TV segmented sports channels, and a conversation began. I think it started somewhere around 2009. Began to be like, well, how can we build a pay TV network? Eventually, the solution would be to take Speed and Fuel and Fox Soccer and turn them into FS1, FS2, and FXX, which gave FX, which now had all this content library, a second partner channel to do things like air The Simpsons nonstop, right? But that took several years, and there were several false starts. I remember the company going, David having to go talk, to his superiors at the company to include the merger. I was like, oh, here we go again, competing with ESPN, right? It's like, are we sure we want to do this and everything else? But we slowly marched towards it, began to do deals. I remember Randy's deal with the Pac-12, the first deal with the Pac-12, gave us the right to take games that he was getting for his regional sport, for the regional sports networks, and move them to a national pay TV channel. It wasn't mentioned. It was assumed it would be FX, but the thought in everybody's back of their head was, well, it could be this Fox Sports pay TV channel. And so it was a long conversation. There was a lot of research. There was a lot of programming in it. I got to be a part of that at a high level. And I just learned a ton. The mistakes were made, but at the same time, it was $1 billion plus value creation exercise. And it was really exciting to get to be a part of it from soup to nuts, to include launching it and getting to manage it, help be part of managing its processes for a couple of years. Very exciting. I will tell you, the birthing of Fox Sports 2 is the more interesting story, because originally we didn't want to launch FS1 and FS2. Fuel TV made money, even though the audience level there was small, and folks were worried that at some point a distributor might say, I don't need this, right? So, I remember going to my boss, Bill Wanger, and I remember having this conversation with Randy Freer. Like, I don't think I can manage all the live events on FS1 and meet our contractual covenants about having to be on a certain network without a backup channel. And eventually we got the approval to turn Fuel into Fox Sports 2. But I painted this picture of, we're going to violate all of our contracts within 6 months because we're going to have live sports overruns. I'm not going to have any place to put them. So Fox Sports 2, America's spunkiest sports network, came into existence to be FS1's backup where it could be. But it was interesting because I don't know that Fox Sports 2 would exist if I hadn't have been adamant about the inability of my team to manage the live events properly across all the networks without having it there.
Well, let's finish with this, because coming off of what you just said there, you obviously have your fingerprints all over Fox Sports over the years that you've been there. So, and we're joined by Pat Crakes. I'm Bryan Fenley. How would you define your career at Fox and where it stands and what you did in your time there as a whole?
Well, I think it's interesting to say about fingerprints. I don't know about fingerprints, right? I mean, I was really lucky for 20 years. I got to work with two other people who were smarter and better than me in a lot of things, Mike Mulvihill and Bill Lang. The three of us had a really unique partnership, and we were enabled by David and Ed and by Randy and Eric to do a lot of things that research executives don't get to do, right? We eventually became programming, content strategy. They gave us a lot of room to run, right? So I did get to contribute a lot, but it's because I got to draft off of brilliant people like Bill and Mike, David, Ed, Randy, Eric, Scott Ackerson, David Nathanson, um, lots of people, right, who were experts in what they were doing, and I got to add something to the mix, right, to what was really a very collaborative thing. I don't know about fingerprints. I know that I contributed, right, and I cherish those years greatly, and I feel awful lucky that I got to be in the right place at the right time, because I don't know, I'd probably be managing a bar somewhere in Guatemala if I hadn't gotten out of the studio mailroom. It'd be a very well-run bar, Brian,
It would
but
be.
with lots of innovative strategy for Tuesday night dime beers. But the truth is that I was lucky to be in a place that enabled me to do what I do best in my own way. People tolerated that, and people encouraged me to grow and take risks, and everybody fed off of each other, and you could make a mistake, but it was about how you recovered from it. And I had a background that helped me there too. My military background helped me, and things I did in my civilian life helped me. And I feel really fortunate that I got to be teamed up with those guys and gals for so long. I remember when I was first learning about contracts and stuff like that, and the person who helped explain things to me were people like Karen Brodkin, right? I mean, that's pretty good when a Karen Brodkin is the person who's kind of like explaining to you the way this works, right? When it comes to negotiations and stuff, or getting to watch, executives like, David Nathanson build the soccer business in the United States, or Vincent Cordero, who's no longer at Fox Sports, but who turned Fox Deportes around from a business that lost $5 million to, in 3 years, of making $30 million in net operating profit, simply by saying US Latinos want to watch not something they would see, south of the Rio Grande. They want to watch what they see on US television. So he gave them sports shows that looked like what you see on ESPN. Boom, right? Getting to be around those people and being enabled by them was really, I lucked out, and I was able to contribute because I was tagged up with these brilliant, hardworking, innovative folks. Very lucky.
Pat, you have surrounded yourself with a lot of smart people you also are very intellectual, and this business is in a much better spot thanks to your IQ and the way in which you are able to seemingly predict the future in the way this sports business model is going. Pat Crakes, I'm Bryan Fenley. You can follow Pat on Twitter, Aquinas82nd. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. Pat, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.